A Boy Scout learns a Scout law, and the Scout law is to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, clean, brave, and reverent. Amazing principles for a young guy at a personal level, but I think they're also amazing principles to run your business by.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in the state. Today, I'm joined by Chuck Surack, the founder of Surack Enterprises, a group of companies that represent a variety of industries, including aviation, real estate development, eye care, hospitality, and much more. Chuck and his wife, Lisa, also oversee the Surack Family Foundation, which supports hundreds of charities in Northeast Indiana. But Chuck is perhaps best known for Sweetwater Sound, the company he started in Fort Wayne in 1979 after touring the country as a saxophonist and a keyboard player with several bands. Sweetwater Sound began as a mobile recording studio, but eventually grew into one of the largest retailers of musical instruments and professional audio equipment. In 2021, Chuck sold a controlling interest in Sweetwater to a private equity firm and began to focus more of his time in entrepreneurial ventures and philanthropy. Chuck is a longtime supporter of music education, especially in the Fort Wayne area, and he and Lisa have become major supporters of Taylor University. The Surack Family Foundation is supporting Taylor's film and media arts programs and its Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. In Fort Wayne, Chuck is playing a major role in the redevelopment of the city's downtown, investing $82 million in The Pearl, a 7-story mixed-use building in the heart of downtown that opened this fall. Chuck has also made investments in Indianapolis. Earlier this year, he became a part owner of the Indy 11 soccer team, and he's invested in properties in downtown Indianapolis. In addition to Chuck's many businesses and charitable interests, you're an avid helicopter pilot and finds time to play the saxophone at venues around Northeast Indiana. Here's our conversation. We've got a saxophone, but we're not going to ask you to play today, Chuck, but it's representative certainly of your early years. Chuck, I want to welcome you to Off the Record podcast, and really appreciate you spending time talking with us today.
Well, thank you, Nate. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, Chuck, you have had an incredibly fascinating life and career, but I think it all started when you made a decision early in life to play the saxophone. Talk about your earliest days in music and how the beginning of your career in your business life began maybe with the saxophone.
Well, back in those days, almost every fifth grader got to play a music instrument, and I wanted to play trombone. And my dad happened to be a frustrated accordion player. He played through college, and he said, "You don't want a trombone, you want a saxophone." I said, "What is saxophone? Why do I want a saxophone?" "Oh, well, they get all the solos." And I didn't even know what that meant as a fifth grader, but we went to a pawn shop in Columbus, Ohio, and he bought a saxophone for me, and I was going to play saxophone instead of trombone. I self-taught myself and had music directors, band directors, that sort of thing, but I never took a private lesson, but fortunate enough to play well enough to play literally all over the country, and never thought I could turn it into Sweetwater and all the stuff we've done.
So you referenced turning it into Sweetwater, but after high school, as I mentioned in the intro, I know you began to tour with the band. Tell us a little bit about what was that right after high school, or when was that? When did that take place?
When I was in school, I was going down kind of two paths. I wanted to be a doctor. I love children, wanted to be a pediatrician, but I also liked the music thing. And I thought I would take a gap year, although we didn't call it that back then, but I would take a year off, go play music, and I'd come back and go to college was my thinking. And through high school, I had all the Latin and chemistry and all the required classes. But once the music was bubbling in your blood, it was really hard to turn back. But back in those days, music quite often was 6 nights a week. We had a lot of nightclubs and restaurants and college circuits where you could play Monday through Saturday, and then Sunday you'd travel to somewhere else. And so I had booking agents that would book our bands, and we literally traveled almost we did 45 states, so most of the country.
So that was 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, for almost 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah, and after 5 years, I finally decided enough was enough. It was fun living out of suitcases, but not making much money. I never was a good enough musician to really make that high level, or at least I wasn't committed to it. And I wanted to do something else, so I came back to Fort Wayne. By then, I'd gathered a little bit of recording equipment because when we were on the road, quite often we'd go into the local radio stations to record commercials of our band playing this week at the hotel or wherever it was. And there weren't many recording studios. They really quite often was done in the radio station. So I was the guy that always learned how to work the equipment. I gathered a little of this equipment when I was on the road, and I came home and I have a beat up VW bus and some recording equipment. What am I going to do? I started a company where I would go out on location and record bands, choirs, preachers, company presidents. I'd run 200 feet of microphone cables in. I'd mic them up. I'd sit in the bus with my headphones. And in those days, it was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And I would record the band, the choir, the preacher, whatever it was. And then I would take those recordings to the living room of my 12 by 55 mobile home. And I started very modest, and I would put the songs in the right order, and then we'd send away and make LPs or cassettes and that sort of thing.
There's something called, and I've heard you talk about this before, a Kurzweil K250. Am I pronouncing it? Is it Kurzweil?
Kurzweil, yeah.
And so I've heard you talk about how you became really an expert in this piece of equipment, but can you talk a little bit about the history of Kurzweil and how you got involved?
Sure.
Because I think it relates to where you went after what you just described.
I'm in this mobile home, and I finally move into a small place on the west side of Fort Wayne. And I was friends with a local piano and organ store dealer. And one day he came to me and he says, "Do you want to go to the NAMM show?" I said, "What is the NAMM show?" That's National Association of Music Merchants. And this was a big show up in Chicago where the manufacturers would show all their products to the various music dealers. I said, "Yeah, I'll go with you." And I went up in 1983 and I saw a prototype of what's called the Kurzweil K250. And it was the first instrument that would play back digital recordings of other instruments. So you had an 88-note keyboard like a piano, but it could sound like a 9-foot grand Steinway piano, or it could sound like a 45-piece string section or a 50-voice choir or an upright bass. And I thought, well, how cool is this? If I bought this instrument, I could use it in my recording studio. And at the end of the sessions, I could offer my customers a little bit extra. And so that's what I did. I bought a very early machine. And at the end of every one of my recording sessions, I'd say, "Would you like to hear your music with this Kurzweil K250, these extra sounds?" And I became kind of the guy that knew the machine well. I reverse engineered how it worked, designed my own sounds, wrote new software for it. I started getting asked to come all around the country to either play on sessions with that instrument or to help my friends. And my friends in those days happened to be Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers and Stevie Wonder and all these old famous artists. And they would call me to use my sounds on their albums. It was a fascinating start to a business.
More than fascinating. I mean, some legends that, of course, that became even more legends over time, but you're involved with the things that make them sound good, right? And so they wanted to work with you. So you mentioned the VW bus, and I haven't been able to see it, but a lot of people talk about there's a VW bus today located at Sweetwater. Is it the same VW bus, or is it a replica of that VW?
It is a facsimile or replica.
Yeah.
Now, that old VW bus, the one I had, was pretty rusted. In fact, my parents gave it to me when I was in high school. And I filled it with 2 gallons of Bondo. I put headlights on it from Tractor Supply that kind of look like bug eyes. And the most amazing thing, I laugh when I think about it today, but I spray painted the bus blue spray paint, but I used 99-cent cans of paint from Kmart. And that's what I drove through high school and on the road as a musician. But eventually it got left at a junkyard in Van Wert, Ohio. So the one that's at Sweetwater is a facsimile of, and it's a much nicer bus than mine was.
You're involved with this intricate piece of equipment called the Kurzweil 250. But over time, your business begins to evolve. I think you're still selling all kinds of recording equipment at Sweetwater. But over time, you become involved in selling musical instruments like saxophones and guitars. And talk about how that transition from that original, where you gained expertise in that original piece of equipment that was important for recording artists. How did it begin then to transition over time to actually all types of instruments?
If I go back to the Kurzweil K250, I started making sounds for it that you could put on a 3.5-inch floppy disk. And I wanted to trade sounds with other users. Well, I quickly found out they weren't making their own sounds. They were typically just musicians, and they weren't as engineering oriented as I was. But I started keeping a list or a database of all my friends that had these Kurzweils across the country. And before long, I had about 300 names that I was communicating with on my dot matrix printer, going, "If you want these sounds, I've got them available for $5 a disc." And it was kind of frustrating because it was taking me out of the recording business and just copying floppy disks. Sometimes I'd be doing a session with a musician in the room and also copying discs off to the right side. And I was kind of multitasking back in those days. But I became eventually a dealer for the Kurzweil K250 and the parts for it. And it didn't take very long where a friend called me one day and said, "I understand you can do sheet music on the computer." And I said, "I know how to do that. I'm doing that in my own studio. I've already written billing software in my studio. I wrote a computer program that would label cassettes back in those days." And so I became a dealer for the music software. And then they wanted recording equipment. So I became a dealer for some initial Tascam and Fostex recording equipment. And it just exploded from there. And next thing you know, fast forward to today, we have 9 million customers. We sell 80,000 different products, but it's all based on that one-on-one relationship where we're helping our friends with their equipment.
You're listening to what the customer needs, and they
Absolutely.
say, can I get this from you? And your answer always is?
Absolutely. Sometimes I didn't know how I was going to do it or what the path was to get there. And I will tell you, in the early days, operating out of my home, a lot of the manufacturers didn't want to sell to us. Again, fast forward to today, we have 1 million square feet under roof, and we're the largest in the world at what we do. And they're usually knocking at our door to do business with us, but it's a far cry from the way it was 35, 40 years ago.
I bet. So do I have this right that Sweetwater today sells approximately 100,000 guitars a year? Is that number close to being correct? Or
no, it's not even close. And this number blows me away. 350,000 guitars a year.
Oh my gosh.
1,000 guitars a day. Where do they go? 1,000 guitars a day. And every one of them that's more than $400, we open up and do a full QC quality control check on. We have 55 points. We want to make sure that the guitar is going to be great out of the box. When you get it, I want it to be the kind of guitar I would want to play.
1,000 guitars a day.
They are stacked up in the warehouse. It's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. So why do people, instead of, I guess may I ask it this way, do manufacturers sell direct to customers? What does that look like in terms of how
There's a little bit of that going on, but most manufacturers still respect the dealer and sell through a dealer.
And that's how the business historically has been. And
there's about 5,000 dealers in the United States.
Wow. And I'm assuming that Sweetwater was one of the first to really capture the opportunity on the internet and really become one of the largest retailers in the world in this business. How would you say that happened?
It was different how we did it. In fact, in the early days, we were already selling all kinds of technology, recording equipment, keyboards, sound systems, and all that. And I kept having customers ask about buying a guitar from us. And I had a whole lot of employees that played guitar. And I thought, I know how to do this. And so what we did that was different is we gave the customer the comfort, the satisfaction that if you bought a guitar from us, it would be great out of the box. So we take every guitar, as I mentioned, we open it up, we make sure that it's in tune, and we make sure there's not imperfections in the finish, that the pickups work. And you would say, well, they all come from a factory. Why wouldn't they already be that way? Well, frankly, just like automobiles, on Monday, Mary might have a bad day or a good day, or Bill on Friday has a good day or a bad day. And in fact, in the early days, some of the really famous brands of guitars, we were seeing 20% of the guitars were not up to our quality standards. And if they weren't to my standards, I didn't want to sell them. And in fact, a couple of the manufacturers started giving us some grief, and we'd try and fix them first. And if we couldn't fix them, we'd send them back. And they were saying, you're sending too many of these guitars back, and all we do is turn around and sell them to your competitors. And I would say, well, that's fine if you want them to sell B stock or demo guitars, but they're just not the standard we want. So eventually, most of those manufacturers came around and they improved their own QC. But even today, it's probably 5 to 10% of the guitars are just not to the level I would want. So if you buy a guitar from Sweetwater in the middle of the night, you can go online and you can see that guitar down to the wood grain. We take individual pictures of every guitar, the serial number, the kind of wood, all that sort of stuff. You can decide at 3 a.m, that's what you want. The next morning, we'll call you up and say, thanks for the order on the guitar. And by the way, do you want a case for it? Do you want extra strings? So on and so forth. And it just makes the buying experience really, really good as compared to, and by the way, our building's completely humidity controlled, so we don't have to worry about the wood warping and all that. Most music stores across the country, and there's some great ones, I don't mean to downplay that, but most of them are in shopping centers, they're in rented space, so they don't have good control of their humidity in their environment. And then they're sitting on the wall. And so you have young people coming in and they got belt buckle scratches on them and they're not really set up well. And it's just a whole different experience buying it from us, where the only people that have touched it is the manufacturer and our own QC people.
It sounds like you have helped the manufacturers get better and better through your quality control process.
Yeah, they've come and they see how we do it. They see what lights we're using to look for those imperfections. And many of them have improved their situations.
So what's the most expensive guitar I could buy from Sweetwater?
I don't know what we have on our website today, but we've sold multiple $100,000 guitars.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What makes a guitar? Is it the wood? Is it the customization, or what is
all
it?
The above, but it is quite often it's a very limited wood. They maybe have done a lot of ornate work on the guitar. And we don't sell a lot of those. We do sell a lot of $10,000 to $20,000 guitars and dozens of $50,000 guitars. What we don't sell often, there are a couple collectors or specialty shops around the country that are selling these $250,000 or $500,000 guitars. Those are usually used one-off, something like that. Maybe the Beatles played, or the kind that Mr. Ursay would buy.
That's right.
So we don't sell any of those. We sell only new stuff usually.
So tell us where the name Sweetwater sound came from. And now is it more referred to Sweetwater?
It's just Sweetwater today. Because we do more than sound. We do video and all kinds of stuff.
Sure. So tell us, what was the genesis of Sweetwater?
Yeah, that's a funny story. When I was out in the country in my little 12 by 55 mobile home, there were a lot of farms around me that had signs by their farm, and it might be Bill's Acreage or John's Farm or whatever. And I was moving into the west side of Fort Wayne. I had my first little 1,000 square foot house. And I wanted to change the name of my company. Up until then, it was C&B Audio. So I wanted to change the name of the company, but the property that I had acquired was not zoned for business use. The next property next to me was, but my property was still residential. And so I wanted a sign that was big enough my customers could now come to find me, but also small enough that it wouldn't raise the ire of the local zoning officials. And I had 2 acres of land. I had a little creek in the backyard, and I started thinking about names, and I'm just putting them on a piece of paper. And I said, water in the backyard, that's kind of sweet. And that's where Sweetwater came from. And it could have easily been Chuck's recording studio or something else, but it's Sweetwater. And through the years, I've asked all my marketing people to come up with a better story, but I don't think there is a better story than the truth.
It's a good one. So I know you've got some wonderful business philosophies. We've kind of touched on one already, which is never say no to the customer and figure out how to get to a yes. And I know you've done that, but I know you've got others as well that have been key to building your company and to performing for your customers. And tell me a little bit about a couple of your business philosophies outside of always say yes.
They're not revolutionary, but it's just how you apply them. But I would tell you the biggest thing, and probably the part that led the most to my success, was Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts are not so popular today. I mean, they are popular, but not as popular as when I was a kid. And a Boy Scout learns a Scout law. And the Scout law is to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, clean, brave, and reverent. Amazing principles for a young guy at a personal level, but I think they're also amazing principles to run your business by. Right off the bat, just trustworthy and loyal and helpful. And so everyone that works at our company are just really, really servant leadership type folks. They always try and do the right thing for the customer. And we may not know the answer, and we'll tell the customer we don't know the answer, but we'll find out. We'll call you back. We always call people back. And the kind of philosophies that are important to me, just always do the right thing.
I was in Boy Scouts. I don't have that memorized. I got to go back and
you can Google it anytime.
But those are all good ones to live by and to operate your business. I couldn't agree more. I'm curious, along the way, I mean, you've obviously been an incredibly successful business person and beyond, but have you had mentors that have been important to you, whether it's a family member or somebody in business along the way?
You know, there have been lots and lots of people that helped me on the way. I don't know that I have a specific person that I really, other than my father. My father was a chemical engineer, but he also, while he was a chemical engineer, did lots of entrepreneurial things. I didn't recognize it then. Entrepreneur was not a word back in the early 60s and 70s, but he was a professional bowler. He was a professional archer. He repaired TVs and washing machines, and he had a non-alcoholic nightclub, and he had a car lot, a buy here, pay here car lot. All along, he was being a chemical engineer and then eventually electrical engineer. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I definitely got a lot of my influence from him.
Sure, you soaked up just being around him and seeing what he was doing, soaked up some of those concepts and ideas. Let's take a quick break. This is Off the Record Podcast.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, you mentioned some very famous musicians that in the early days that were working with you on the Kurzweil 250. I know today you still have musicians that come visit your large warehouse and distribution center. Is that something that's pretty regular occurrence? That you've got well-known musicians who are coming to pick out or to talk to your folks?
Yeah, we have about 1,000 visitors a day. There are school buses usually lined up in front of our building, whether it's high schools or colleges come to see us. Professional musicians. It's probably every day, but I'm sure it's every other day at least. And it's the biggest of big names. We typically don't drop names. We try to be professional about that. But almost anybody you see, we either sell to the performer themselves or the band or the production company that's involved.
If you had to name, you've obviously met and worked with a lot of different ones. Are there any in particular, maybe it's your favorite or one of your favorite artists? Or is there anybody that kind of stands out over the last number of decades you've been involved in this industry?
it probably won't mean much to most of your listeners, but as a saxophone player, when I was young growing up, there was a saxophone player named Boots Randolph. And Boots Randolph had a big hit called Yakety Sax. And that's the song you hear when somebody's rolling down the hill and they kind of speed it up real fast. It happens to be the ringtone of my cell phone, but it was also the theme song for the Benny Hill show for a long time. And, he was my idol as a sax player. He was a big session player in Nashville. And, eventually got to meet him and become good friends and recorded his last couple albums with him. And, but just a famous, an amazing musician. And probably his other big claim to fame is Brenda Lee's Rocking Around the Christmas Tree. Right in the middle, there's a big rocking sax solo. That's my friend Boots Randolph.
Oh, that's really neat.
And sadly, he passed away about 15 years ago or so. But, I would tell you, I've met many or most of the major musicians, and once you get to that level and get them behind closed doors, they're normal people with the same fears and same ambitions. And some are just the most incredible people. I feel bad for them. They're so famous, they can't go to restaurants. They can't walk down a hallway. But behind closed doors, most of them are just really great people.
So it's one thing to be an accomplished business person, musician, but you're also an avid helicopter pilot. How did you become interested in aviation? Probably more than just a helicopter pilot, an airplane pilot. But how did that interest and how did you find time to get involved in that space?
My dad was a private pilot, and he flew a small single-engine, tail-dragging airplane called an Aranca Chief. And I flew with him a lot, and I actually learned how to siphon gas out of a 55-gallon drum, where you suck on a hose. And if you did that with your kid today, you'd probably go to jail. But back in those days, it was okay. That's how we put gas in the airplane. But I never was interested in aviation. And then at age 50, I had a friend flew into a small air show in Fort Wayne in his helicopter, personal helicopter. And I said, Pete, that is so cool. How do you do that? Oh, it's easy. You just get your license. I said, well, I'm 50. I'm too old. He said, oh, no. I have a friend in his 60s that did it. I said, really? And so I went home and started working on my wife. And that year for Christmas, I got an FAA logbook and how to fly helicopters. And so in February, I started training. And by August, I had my license. And that was, 17 years ago now or something.
So you turned that hobby into a business eventually. Yep. And one of the Surack Enterprises businesses is Sweetwater Helicopters.
Sweet Helicopters, yeah.
Sweet Helicopters. And I've read that Sweet Helicopters will provide charter service to one of my favorite events, the Indianapolis 500. And we all know what trying to fight the traffic like is to Indy 500. So I want to take you up sometime on taking a helicopter ride, because that sounds like the way to go. And it sounds like that's a growing part of the business.
It's a huge business, specifically the Indy 500. And we'll take, maybe 500 people or so this year from either the regional airports around Indianapolis, or the last couple of years we've been able to do the heliport downtown. And to be able to zip downtown in 3 or 4 or 5 minutes is a lot better than the traffic before or after the race. And every year we grow more and more customers. But in our charter helicopter business, we have, 8 or 9 helicopters now, and we fly all over the Midwest, whether it's taking people from Indy to Chicago or Fort Wayne to Detroit.
What's a helicopter ride from Indy to Chicago time-wise? What is that? How long does that take?
It takes about 35 to 40 minutes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How fast are you going in the helicopter?
160 to 180 mile an hour.
Okay.
And there's no traffic.
That sounds like another great way to go.
Yeah, it's a great way to travel if you can. We do it with all walks of life. People are doing just that one day for the Indy 500, but there's also business people and professionals and all kinds of folks.
Is that a business that's headquartered in Fort Wayne?
It is Fort Wayne, yeah.
And do you see that expanding across the state, even beyond the state of Indiana?
Well, it has been expanding over the last several years. And we've gone from my single helicopter to today, the number we have. We now have one based here in Indianapolis. We have based up in Goshen. We had one in Chicago for a long time. So it continues to grow. And then also this year, we took over managing all the helicopters for Parkview Hospital. So the pilots work for us. And so we make sure from a health and safety point of view. Initially,
you became an aviation enthusiast, a helicopter pilot. And I know you've had flight school, you've had, of course, the charter business we're talking about. I think you even had an aerial film production company. Now I think you have a specialty insurance company, all these different aviation businesses. So you've taken something that you were passionate about, turned it into a business. I'm curious, any advice for those that are very passionate about a hobby and thinking about turning it into a business? Just talk a little bit about taking one of your hobbies and passions and saying, well, let's see if I can make a run at a business opportunity here.
Well, come January, Sweetwater will be 46 years old, and that's a great example of taking a hobby. I've been fortunate my whole life. I feel like I've never worked. I know that's a cliche, and people say that, but it's just so fun to be in a business that you actually enjoy doing. And I feel bad for people that have to get up every day and do something they don't enjoy doing. And I've been very blessed to have great people around me. So, getting the helicopter business or the airplane aviation business going, just have great people and philosophies of always doing things the right way.
So you have the aviation business, but you're also into optical. I know you've got an eye care company in Fort Wayne. As I mentioned, you're in real estate development now and many other businesses. How do you manage to stay on top of all these businesses? Do you have a management philosophy that you employ to be able to effectively feel like you're staying on top of all these very different businesses?
Well, I'm not sure I am staying on top of all of them, but I just have really, really great people. I have managing directors of each one of those businesses. In fact, we just happened to have our holiday party last night, and we had all the managers on stage talking about what they've done over the last year. And what came across very clearly is that I gave them the freedom to dream. I don't say no to them. I might question once in a while, but they're running their own businesses, and I just line them up and get out of the way and let them do as good as they can do.
Good things happen when you do that, as long as you got the right person, right?
Absolutely.
So I mentioned also in the beginning that you've been involved, I think, for quite some time in the rejuvenation efforts of downtown Fort Wayne. Like a lot of Midwestern cities, Fort Wayne, and for decades was harder hit. Loss of manufacturing jobs, I know, hit a lot of Indiana and Midwestern cities. Can you talk a little bit about how that effort began? Because today, Fort Wayne is viewed as a city on the move, a city that is investing heavily in its downtown. It wasn't always that way, looking back a couple of decades. What kind of sparked the beginning of that renaissance in Fort Wayne?
I would say there were two things, and you're absolutely right. Our big employer for a long time was International Harvester. And back in the early 80s, they moved away, and oh my gosh, what's Fort Wayne going to do? Fortunately, a couple of years later, General Motors came to town and built a GM truck plant, one of the most profitable plants of their whole manufacturing. And that gave us some hope, a little bit of future thinking. But what really changed it for us was we built a ballpark in downtown Fort Wayne. And it was about 16, 17 years ago, our city forefathers, a couple mayors ago, wanted to go in front of city council and talk about a ballpark. Well, most of our city was against it. In fact, they did some polls and nearly 90% of the people were against the ballpark because we had a concrete ballpark out at our Coliseum, which they thought was good enough. And that was kind of the attitude of Fort Wayne. It's good enough. And myself and several other business leaders and the mayor went in front of city council and said, it's not about a ballpark. It's about the investment downtown. And by then, our downtown, even though in the heyday it was busy with retail, it had since moved out and gone out to the suburbs. But in spite of what the citizens thought they wanted, our city council approved this investment to do a ballpark in downtown. It gets built, and the next year it's built. It's the number one minor league ballpark in the country. And for the last 15 years, something like 13 out of the 15 years, it's been the number one minor league ballpark in the country. It's an amazing experience. They do 70 ball games a year. They do 700 other events, from starting races to farmers markets and all that sort of thing. But what it really did is it caused confidence in our city to come back. And so the next year we got a hotel over center field. We got a crosswalk to our Embassy Performing Arts Theater. It didn't take very long. And Tim Ash built the Ash Building in downtown Fort Wayne, an 8-story building. And then our mayor found the money and found a way to develop our riverfronts, which been around since the early 1800s, and we hadn't used them. They were covered with trees and all that. And we opened up our downtown, and we just have finished phase 1 and just now starting phase 2, but $100 million development downtown. It caused myself and others to invest in downtown. We redid our landing. And as you said, I just opened up an $82 million building this fall. And there's just a lot of confidence. And we're one of the few cities in the Midwest where we have population gain. So we're growing from that point of view. And we're on the move in Fort Wayne. And I give a lot of credit to the late Mayor Henry. He was just a great, great mayor, great leader, and he assembled great people around him.
It sounds like, and from everything I've heard, there really wasn't politics involved in this, which is, I think, is important. It was really everybody coming together about, in terms of, let's set a goal of turning this city around and really making it an attractive and opportunity to bring people together and focus on that downtown. When you look back and think about what components made that successful, you mentioned the ballpark, but are there any other lessons that a similar sized city could learn from what Fort Wayne has achieved? Because I recently visited when we had our Engage Indiana event, did some touring around. It's truly incredible what has happened in downtown Fort Wayne, and there's still more coming. I see the cranes, I see the redevelopment. Incredibly exciting. And as you said, population is coming and the city's growing. So are there any lessons for similar situated towns? You mentioned one, the population didn't think they wanted it, but they ended up gravitating towards it. Talk a little bit about what you've learned.
I would say there have been some politics. You can't help it when you have Republicans and Democrats. What has been great in Fort Wayne, our Democratic mayor, Tom Henry, was probably as Republican as the politicians have reached across the party lines, and we've not let politics get in the way. I would also say this. I think the reason the ballpark got built, the reason there's been all these is the business community. The business community and the people that live in it have to decide that they want to improve their area. The politicians usually are short term, a term or two or three, but the business people are there for a long term. Right. And so when the business community comes together, a great example of that is our Electric Works project, one of the largest infrastructure projects ever done in the state of Indiana. An old GE building, it was 100 years old. It was going to take $300 million to get this thing done. We got $65 million from the city of Fort Wayne. We got a lot of money from the state, but we were still short, and the mayor wanted to stop the project. And myself and a couple other business leaders, we pulled another 8 or 9 of us together, and we said, Mayor, we're this close. We can't stop now. We've got to finish redeveloping this. And frankly, one of the business leaders stepped up, put a little more money into the building or into the process, and the mayor signed off on it and got done. And today we have a beautiful building that's in phase 1, and there'll be a phase 2 and 3 to come at some point. But I really give the business leaders a lot of credit for making things happen.
It is a beautiful development, and the activity there kind of all day long and even into the evening, and the good connections that are happening there. And it's a beautiful testament to what can happen when, as you said, everybody comes together, the business community, the local officials and the state. That's a wonderful
That was an amazing joint process of everybody being involved. I will tell you, a few people on the street are saying it's not successful because they see the food court vendors struggling right now. Well, there's no tenants around there. Very soon, there'll be an apartment building just to the north. It's almost done. They're wanting to do an apartment on the east side of Broadway. But in the meantime, we do have the headquarters for the largest privately held company in the state. Do it best. That's and now they just required True Value. Right. And so there's a lot of great success in there. And to make that be the headquarters, it's already very, very successful. Yeah. It just doesn't look like it at the street level sometimes.
It looks great, and I know more development will follow. You have to start somewhere, and that'll be a draw, I know, to more development. So I've heard a little bit that Fort Wayne is becoming a music destination. Arts and music are at least a focus, which is pretty awesome to hear. And I'm sure that's something that you're passionate about. Is that beginning to take root? Is that something that could be another quality of place attractor to people and businesses?
Kind of already is. Yeah. And part of that is at Sweetwater, we have 2,800 employees. More than half of them we've relocated to Fort Wayne from all around the country. And many of them are musicians. And if they're not, quite often their spouses are artists or musicians themselves. So in Fort Wayne, there's more live music. The music at our churches on Sunday morning is just incredible. The plays that go on, the dance, the art in general, our arts are really, really strong for the size of our city. And the Greater Fort Wayne Inc. and the Downtown Improvement District decided a few years ago to focus on that a little bit more. And it seems to be working. I don't know that we'll ever be a Nashville or New York City, but we'll have a really, really strong arts culture in Fort Wayne.
That can be a very important piece of regional economic development strategy and attraction of people and investment. So
I kind of look at it like Indianapolis is with sports. Fort Wayne will be with arts.
So beyond Fort Wayne, as I mentioned, you've made some investments in Indianapolis, and you've been a big proponent of the need to keep the heliport operating in downtown Indianapolis. And I know earlier this year you became a co-owner of the professional soccer team, Indy 11, with Ursal Ozdemir. I would like to just touch on the heliport. I think it's in the process of being decommissioned. I think we just reported at IBJ that's moving forward. Get your reaction to, is this a mistake? If it is, why is it a mistake? And where the future of aviation is going, and why we may need things like this that now feels like it's going away.
But let me also start with being really clear. I would love to see Indianapolis have an MLS soccer team. I hope that happens. I really do. I just think it could have been done in a way that wouldn't have hurt the heliport. And the heliport is an amazing asset, not just for the city of Indianapolis, but for the whole state of Indiana. And most major cities across the country have heliports in their downtown. Miami has several of them, sure. Fort Lauderdale, Chicago, Dallas, New York. And with Indianapolis and all of our major league sports and the concerts that happen downtown, it's just an amazing asset. And I don't say that just for me personally, but for all the other operators. And IU Health was down here and still here with their transfer station. They love being downtown. It's convenient. But the Indianapolis city fathers have said that it needs to turn into something else. And it's been a discussion for the last almost 4 years now. But the infrastructure to get it in downtown, it'll never happen again.
I was going to say, this is a very difficult process.
It's very difficult with the FAA.
If one day we say we need a heliport, it's not a simple process, is it?
And what's really sad, and I've tried to tell everybody that'll listen to me, we are on the verge of some new technology called eVTOLs, electronic vertical takeoff and landing. These are electrically powered. Think of them as helicopters, but they're electrically powered. So they're quieter. They're much, much cheaper to operate. Envision going from downtown Indianapolis to Carmel in 6 minutes at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're coming.
I've seen actually, I was out in California and I saw a presentation and they're coming fast. I mean, this isn't like 20 years from now. I mean, this is
there's 200 companies working on them right now. Several of the companies have already done test flights this fall. They were hoping to have approvals this fall. It's been backed up a little bit, but most people are thinking by the end of next year, the end of 2025, these things will be available and start flying. And they have millions and millions of dollars invested in them. All the armies, the militaries, the UPS, the FedEx have bought lots of them, ordered lots of them. There'll be a day where it'll be a great way to travel for literally a few $100s to go from downtown Indianapolis to Carmel or whatever. And sadly, we won't have that infrastructure in downtown Indianapolis. In fact, the ruling that just came out from the FAA is requiring the airport authority to build a new heliport, but they're going to build it at the Indianapolis International Airport, which I flew this morning to Indianapolis, and it was a 25-minute ride from the airport downtown. And that's not the same as being right downtown.
That's right.
There's also other reasons, infrastructure, medical. If we had an emergency, you'd want to be able to land big helicopters downtown. If the president or vice president wants to come to town, it's just a shame that we're going to lose it.
I agree, especially given how fast the future's coming with these flying vehicles that will need a place to land. You touched on Major League Soccer, and you said, gosh, you hope that does happen, just not at the expense of the heliport. But what are your thoughts today on what is the status of MLS from your perspective, and as the mayor's actions put on ice Indianapolis's efforts or opportunity with MLS? How do you feel about where we are today?
I don't know the intimate details, and I'm not in the negotiations, so I can't really say. I'm not in the mayor's shoes. I'm not going to throw stones at him. I do think it's a shame what Ursal and Indy 11 has built over the last 10 or 11. They've shown the community, they've shown MLS that soccer can be a big thing here. And I couldn't spell soccer 6 or 8 months ago. And when I got involved and started coming to games, it's infectious. I mean, I love coming to the games now. And I think it would have been a natural step for the Indy 11 team maybe to become the Major League Soccer at some point. Again, I'm not pushing for that necessarily. And whatever we need to do to get MLS soccer here, I think is a great thing. I just don't think it should have happened at the heliport. And frankly, what I would also say, I wish, and maybe they just can't do it, but I wish there had been a little more transparency. Okay, who's behind this and what's really going on? I mean, there's all kinds of scuttle behind the scenes, but nothing's come out publicly yet.
Well, I want to turn to philanthropy side. You and your wife, Lisa, started the Surack Family Foundation, which I believe most of the focus has been in Northeast Indiana, which is wonderful, your hometown and where you made your life. And I know there's been focus on music and the arts, which of course makes a ton of sense given your background and experiences. But I think you've also begun to really do some transformative things with high schoolers and exposing them to the music. Can you talk a little bit about that work?
We're just very proud with the sale of Sweetwater several years ago. We were able to have this money that we invested into a foundation. And we had done that for a long time at Sweetwater. In fact, we had supported over 600 nonprofits. We were probably the largest donor in Fort Wayne to nonprofits. And we were very blessed. We're born with nothing, and just where we've come, we're just so thankful and blessed. And we know we can't take it with us. We don't see U-Hauls at cemeteries very often, so we're going to try and give it away as much as we can. But, specifically with the music, several years ago, we invested nearly a couple $1 million into Fort Wayne community schools and getting band instruments, violins, violas, saxophones, trumpets, all that sort of thing. And now we wanted to find a way for those students or the people that have those instruments to take private lessons. So we took an old bakery downtown. It was a 300,000 square foot building. We remodeled 40,000 square foot and made a brand new state-of-the-art building where there's 18 lesson rooms. There's a 400-person rehearsal space with variable acoustics and all of that. And we went to Fort Wayne Community Schools and we said we want to offer music lessons to every student that has any interest, regardless of their ability to pay. And so we paid to get the building done. We found some other scholarship money, and we opened up about 6 weeks ago. We were hoping to get 100 students. As of last week, we had 485 students.
Oh my gosh. That's wonderful.
It's just unbelievable. And, some of the people are paying and many of them are not. And I don't care. I want to make an opportunity. And you think about some of the folks in the depressed part of Fort Wayne and they think their way out is NBA or NFL. Well, that's 2 kids a year, 4 kids a year. There's a whole another bunch that could come out through arts. And it's a little bit arrogant for me to say, but I'm a product of Fort Wayne Community Schools. And I'm sort of hoping that we find the next Chuck Surack, someone that wants to really help and give back. And I have to believe by pouring into these young people, we'll make a difference in their lives.
I'm confident that you are and you will. That's a wonderful way to give back. And I'm sure so many will benefit from that generosity. You've also, I know, been generous with Taylor University. I mentioned some of the work that the foundation's doing there. Talk a little bit about how you decided that Taylor would be a good place to invest in.
We're very fortunate. We have a lot of great universities across the state. And I have an 18-year-old daughter who's looking at all of them right now. She's a senior in high school, so I understand that. But I got involved with Taylor many years ago. I had a friend that was the provost and invited me down to the school. And we've hired a lot of Taylor students through the years at Sweetwater. And there's just something about that Taylor upbringing, and probably before they even got to Taylor, frankly. But they come to Sweetwater, they come to my other businesses, and they just have that little something extra special, that little extra spark. And the servant leadership that I talked about before, they all have that with them. And many, many years ago, I was given an honorary doctorate from the school. And then what really, really turned it on for me is a little less than 4 years ago, they got a new president at Taylor, Dr. Michael Lindsay. And he is just so inspirational. And what he's done in the last 3 years at that school is unbelievable. And what he's doing for the little town of Upland is unbelievable. And we're in the process of a $500 million campaign. When we started, he asked me to co-chair a $175 million campaign, and we all choked. Upland, Indiana, they've never been a $175 million campaign. But we believed in him, and that was really the difference. And we lit it up, and frankly, we blew through the $175 million goal real quick, and we reevaluated, and we talked about 300 and 400, and we finally settled on 500, and we've surpassed $300 million already.
That's great.
And it's unbelievable.
That's great. At a time when some higher education institutions are having challenges, for sure, given just the demographics of our country, fewer kids, going to college, and it sounds like Taylor's prospering.
Taylor's had record growth over the last several years. Record growth. We're starting a new nursing school, lots of new buildings, new dorms or apartments now, and it's unbelievable what's happening there.
Really, really neat. Well, Chuck, we made it towards the end of the podcast where we have a little fun. I ask you some questions about some of your favorite things, and you can give me short answers or a little longer in some cases, but we call it the off-the-record speed round. So I'm going to ask you your favorite movie of all time.
I hate to copy what Mike Pence said, but Wizard of Oz is pretty amazing to me. I think Mike said that. Flying Monkeys, saw him when I was a little boy, and I've been infatuated with him ever since.
I'll join you on that one.
We even sponsored the monkeys at the Fort Wayne Children's Zoo, and I'm sure that was a little bit of inspiration from the Flying Monkeys.
Your favorite place to vacation?
We have a home in Naples, Florida, so I love that. But for the last 8 or 9 years, we've been going to Turks and Caicos two, 3 times a year. It's about an hour south of Miami, and it's not built up like a lot of places around the world, and they really understand tourism as their business. And so people treat you well, and it's the most beautiful, beautiful blue water, and it's safe and clean, and we love going there.
I've got to put that on my list.
Turks and Caicos.
I need to make it there.
No, don't go. I don't want anybody else to go. I want to keep it like it is.
Now this gets so much coverage. It's going to blow up. So we talked about this earlier, but if you had to name one favorite musical artist, is it the same guy that you mentioned, or if you maybe go a different genre?
I don't know that I could narrow it down to one. I'm a huge fan of any music that's good. I'm a big Michael Jackson fan. I just love everything he did. There's a band that's been around for 56 years called Tower of Power. They're an R&B soul band. They've played in Indianapolis and Fort Wayne many, many times. They're out of San Francisco Bay Area. I'm good friends with them, and I love their music. But I'd say Michael Jackson and Tower of Power.
Did you ever meet Michael Jackson?
I never met Michael Jackson. I knew all the people around him, his engineer, his producer. In fact, his engineer, a guy named Bruce Swedeen, passed away 4 years ago, was a good friend of mine. And I knew all about the sessions and how they happened. It was amazing, but I never got to meet Michael.
So your favorite music venue in Indiana?
Well, it'd be a little bit self-serving, but we have the Clyde Theater in Fort Wayne. And I say that it's a theater from 1951 that used to be a 2,400-seat movie theater. And then in the 70s, they put a wall down the middle, made 2 1,200-seat theaters. Then it became a church. And then it went dark and it filled up with rats and pigeons and not very good. And a guy bought it at a tax sale for $500. And he came to me and wanted me to help him rebuild it. And eventually I bought the whole thing from him, but we turned it into an incredible music performing venue. And what's really cool about it, it holds about 2,000 people. But we really did it first class from a sound system point of view, from an acoustics point of view, and that doesn't happen at most places. And then also from an artist point, because I'm a musician myself, I made sure that the green rooms or dressing rooms are amazing.
I need to come check
so
that out.
One. The other one I would say also, I just came down this fall and played at the Palladium. I guess now it's called the Allied. That's a phenomenal place. Everything about that was incredible. So I got to play on that stage for a first time. That was fun.
So if you had to name a favorite music venue outside of Indiana where you've seen a great performance, what would that be?
I'd say Carnegie Hall, just because I've seen so many different artists there. It's so, I know there's some really great places all over the country, but Carnegie Hall to me, just when you get to that level, you're at that level. And
you've made it to Carnegie Hall. That's a famous
I haven't played Carnegie Hall yet. I've visited lots of times, but I've never played it.
What's the first thing you do in the morning?
The first thing I do in the morning, probably not a good thing to say, but I sleep way less than my wife. And so she's usually asleep, but I will reach outside of the bed and grab my laptop and catch up on emails and read the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette.
And the IBJ.
I always wait to see what those emails are. And yes, absolutely.
Title of the last book you might have read?
On my desk right now is the Boy Scout Handbook and a Bible. I recently just read the Boy Scout Handbook again, just for the fun of it. And it was good. It was inspirational.
What food could you not live without?
I have pretty good self-control, so I could live without any food, but I like rigatoni. Rigatoni and sausage is good for me.
That's a good one. Best advice you ever received?
Probably from my father. I don't know that he really told me this, but I learned through watching him that anything was possible. And I tell that to people all the time today. Anything's possible and failure is not an option.
Pick yourself back up if you fail the first time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Advice for a young person who wants to make a difference in the world and wants to be a leader.
The best thing, if you want to be a leader, you need to study other leaders. And I would also tell you, as you start leading, you need to turn around once in a while and make sure people are truly following you. There's so many great resources today to become a better leader or a great leader potentially. And you read and you watch videos and you watch other great leaders and you call them and talk to them. I will tell you, most leaders are thrilled to sit down and share a little bit of ideas with you. And so I would just encourage young people to do that, reach out.
I agree. Well, Chuck, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you on Off the Record, the Indiana 250 podcast. And thank you for all you've done for our state, certainly all that you've done for Fort Wayne and here in Indianapolis, and appreciate your time and all your efforts in our state and beyond.
Thank you, Nate. And I appreciate you having me. And I really do appreciate the IBJ. I read it all the time. So, and if you had a read on this saxophone, I would have played a little bit for you. But
next time, I should mention that actually the saxophone is from Ferris Wheel Music in Lebanon. And Megan Ferris was kind enough to lend it, but we didn't get a read in it. And it's a brand new one.
It's a great instrument.
It would have been fun to hear you play a little bit, but at least we get to see you hold it, which is great.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Chuck. To learn more about other leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list, go to indiana250.com and look for a Page 2 feature each week in IBJ. We'll be back with the new Indiana 250 Off the Record conversation soon.